Angular pro tip, best practice. And this time we're going to talk about the inject function. The inject function has become much more powerful since Angular 15. It allows you now to create injectable function, separate functions where you can inject services that you want to use. Let's give an example of best practice of a case where you might think on using injectable functions. Let's examine a simple Angular and NGRX application that is consisting of 3 files. NGRX is a state management, so the state we will put in NGRX simply contains a counter with a number. We configure the NGRX state in the app config, where we hardcode the counter value to have a value of 42. This means if we open the browser, open Redux DevTools, our state contains a counter of 42. Now, if we want to read the counter in our component, so let's go to the app component and let's read the counter value. So if I want to read data from the NGRX store, what I would usually do is I'm going to ask for the dependency injector to provide me with the store service. After I dependency inject the store service, I can read the state and read the counter from that service. So I can say place in the counter $ member a store select and select the counter. So in this case, usually you would use selectors to improve performance, but in this case, we're not going to focus on selectors or the select function, and we're simply going to select the counter. Now I get the counter as an observable. So if I'm getting it an observable, I'm using NGRX, I might as well improve performance by saying that I'm going to use the change detection strategy on push. Now, if I want to place the counter in the template, all I need to do is use the async pipe. So I'll place the counter and pipe it to the async. Now going back to the browser, I see that I managed to print the data 42, which is great. Now let's say I have more of these initialization members, not just from the store. I have like members that might inject a service and then subscribe to something from that service. I have maybe other members that subscribe to HTTP client, some request to a server. So I might have those initialization in many places. Moreover, I might have an additional component that might also want to select the counter. So if I'm, for example, generating another component, so let's say a counter component, I might want to select the same state in the counter component. So I'll have to do the same logic again, something like this to copy paste and also maybe import the store and import the state. And I might also have some kind of manipulation on that data. Maybe I'm using RxJS pipes or some sort of change of that data. So this might be a bit annoying, a bit unclear. It's also harder to extend and harder to test when you have dependencies in the constructor. We can do a bit better than that. So let's see how we can take advantage of injectable functions to accomplish something that is much cleaner, much reusable, better code, better, easier to extend and to test. So let's examine what is injectable functions. Injectable functions are functions that can use the inject function. The inject function is another way you can ask from the dependency injector a service. So you don't have to ask the dependency injector a service only in the constructor. You can also use the inject function. Now, this function has to be called from an injectable context. And in general, it's stuff like the provider's factory or route guards or stuff that relates to a constructor or initialization of members are also something that happens in the class constructor. So it can also be used here. So let's check how we can use the injectable function to not inject the store like this and by only do it in a much cleaner way. So let's create a new file. I'll call it the counter selector. And in this file, I'm going to import from Angular core, I'm going to import the inject function. I'm going to create a function. I'll call this function use counter. And I don't have to pass anything to that function. I'll inject the store. And after I inject the store, I can simply return a store select of the state counter. So I can do something similar to what I did in my component, in my, let's say, example app component. I injected the store and then called the store select. And this is what my counter got, the store select. So I can simply return the value that I want, this store select. So going back to the function counter selector, I can simply return the store select here. Now, this means that in the app component, instead of all this, I can use the use counter. Now I don't need to pass a constructor. I don't need those imports. This is also reusable, so I can also use this in my counter component. And my code is much cleaner, much reusable, much more testable. And also, I can have much more easy manipulation of data in the use counter. So I can also maybe pipe additional RxJS operator, change the data. I can also use the same techniques if, for example, I'm using some kind of service, some kind of HTTP client, some kind of server request. So this is something that is very handy. I gave the NGRX example because in NGRX, we have those a lot. A lot of the components that subscribe to data in the state, we do it a lot. We use the constructor, we use the store, and then we subscribe to some portion of the data in the state. So if you do this, I find it a much cleaner way to read data from your NGRX store. But in general, this best practice is a recommendation for any repeating initialization of members of your component or service or whatever Angular elements that you're now addressing. If you have any repeating initialization that is using the dependency injector, you can now extract it to an external function using injectable function. You got the full source code of this best practice tip in our site academies.com, EN course Angular best practices, inject repeating initializations. In this site, you have a step-by-step guide to how to use those injectable functions. You have the full source code on the right. Like and subscribe, write comment to write your opinion about what you think about this best practice. And that's it. Thank you for watching.